The world logged on to Netflix, expecting a documentary. But what they found was a digital eulogy for a relationship that had already been buried in the vaults of Windsor. After years of speculation, 3 episodes promised the ultimate side of the story, offering a glimpse into a romance that supposedly existed beyond the reach of the tabloids. But while the streaming numbers climbed, the palace did not whisper. It spoke with the cold finality of an iron gate shutting in the dark. Meghan Markle's final appeal had reached the desk of Prince William, and by the time the morning mist cleared over London, the answer was a surgical no. This was not a delay, not a request for more time, and certainly not a softened diplomatic gesture. It was a denial that landed inside the royal household like a verdict everyone had feared. But no one could escape. Meghan read the denial twice, and those close to her say the room seemed to lose its breath as the weight of the words settled. This was her final private appeal, a personal request asking for restored royal access, limited recognition at selected family occasions, and a path back into official communication. She hadn't left this to clerks or lawyers. She had reached for the family heart only to find it had been replaced by the institutional bone. William had answered it himself, a choice that signaled this was no longer an ordinary disagreement between siblings. Royal access was no longer just a privilege. It was a boundary that the future king had decided was permanent. William sat alone before the announcement, moved beyond his desk, looking less like a man claiming power and more like a brother paying the heavy price for it. He knew Meghan would feel the sting of the wound, and that Harry would feel cornered by the sudden lack of options. But he also understood that the monarchy had reached a line it could not afford to cross twice. The appeal had asked for a door to be left ajar, but William's answer built a wall of granite. When he placed the signed response down, the movement was small and silent, but the consequence was seismic. The statement carried no warmth, no family softness, and no promise of a future review. The phrase, "no further consideration," changed the temperature of the entire royal household within minutes. A senior aide noticed the wording and stopped moving, recognizing that he had seen cold statements before. But this one felt sealed from a higher authority. In the coded language of the palace, those 3 words did not mean a pause. They meant a total closure of the file. It told Harry that time would not heal this particular rupture, and warned Meghan that public pressure would not reopen what the crown had now locked. Meghan stared at the meaning until the words became heavier than the heavy vellum paper they were printed on. Behind the polished palace language were real people, navigating the ruins of a family fractured into official policy. Meghan was not just reading a refusal. She was reading the end of her history within the institution she believed had never truly accepted her. William was not just issuing a decree, he was defining the limits of his future reign. Harry stood at the edge of the story, watching the last bridge to his old life burn with a brightness that blinded him. Charles was being informed, but even the king understood that his son's division had crossed a formal line that fatherly sadness could no longer repair. Meghan had asked for something smaller than a full return, hoping that a limited recognition at family events would prove the door wasn't locked forever. She wanted a controlled return to palace channels, the formal system where households and aides exchange the messages that keep the monarchy functioning. Recognition inside the House of Windsor is never just about a seat at a table or a name on a guest list. It is the ultimate signal of belonging. When Meghan saw that William had personally stood at the gate to block her entry, the denial cut deeper than any tabloid headline ever could. It was a rejection of her existence within the royal circle. William carried the weight of the decision like a physical burden pressed against his chest. He knew he was protecting the stability of the monarchy's future, but he also knew he was hurting his brother's wife, and by extension, Harry himself. He was no longer choosing between anger and mercy. He was choosing between family sentiment and the survival of the crown. Every soft exception he made now could become a new crisis tomorrow, and he refused to let private requests turn into public pressure. Harry understood this logic, even if he hated the man who was enforcing it with such clinical precision. Charles read the summary of the denial without speaking, the paper lowering slowly, as if the words had aged him by a decade in seconds. He felt the dual sorrow of a father who had lost a son to distance and a monarch who had to endorse the discipline of an heir. Neither feeling gave him comfort, as he watched the family he loved turn into a series of restricted channels and legal files. Catherine understood the danger from a different perspective, knowing that William's decision would shape the emotional boundary around their own children. She knew that once family access became a subject of political pressure, innocence would be the first casualty. Camilla watched the fallout with a careful practiced silence, recognizing the hardening of William's authority. She had survived years of public judgment and knew that silence was often the only shield that could protect a soul from the storm. The silence that followed the summary was louder than any speech, signaling a shift in the ground beneath every polished rule the palace had once trusted. Meghan had asked for a narrow bridge, and William had removed the foundation of the bridge entirely. Harry stood on one side furious and grieving, while the future of the monarchy moved steadily away from him. To understand why William finally said no, the palace had to look back at a private reception for a children's charity weeks earlier. It was a moment the press later tried to pretend was small, but it was the night trust finally shattered into pieces. Meghan had arrived believing the evening would prove she still held a place near the edge of the royal circle. Family-facing events are not ordinary gatherings. They are carefully orchestrated connections between public compassion and future heirs. Catherine had been given priority at the event placed at the center of future family work, where the Wales children's presence carried a quiet, undeniable power. Meghan saw that choice, and the old wound of exclusion opened once again. She privately challenged a senior palace aide, asking why Catherine was being protected and promoted while she remained outside the light. The aide tried to keep the exchange professional, but Meghan pressed harder, asking if William's office was deliberately keeping her away from the Wales children. The question changed the air in the room instantly. The Wales children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were the red line. Their childhood was tied to the crown, and any pressure around them was no longer treated as adult rivalry. It was a threat to the next generation. The aide recorded the exchange in a formal reception summary, a document that did not shout but preserved the friction for history. When Catherine heard the account, she didn't explode. She went still, and that stillness said more than any angry retort. She understood that this was no longer about a woman wanting recognition. It was about the safety of her children's environment. William heard the same account soon after and gripped the edge of his desk. His answer was quiet, but carried the force of a final judgment. Private family boundaries could no longer be treated as negotiable. Once the phrase "continued pressure around family access" entered the official record, the tone shifted from reconciliation to pure protection. William no longer saw a request that could be softened with time. He saw a pattern that would grow if it were not stopped. Meghan wanted a door reopened, but the prince now believed that door led too close to the people he was sworn to protect. When he connected that night at the charity reception to the final appeal, the last of his hesitation vanished. The past had given William his reason, and the future demanded his resolve. Meghan wanted to hear the answer face to face, leading to a meeting in a room that was small, but felt bigger than the monarchy itself. She entered expecting a negotiation, while William entered knowing there would be none. Across a polished table, two people who once shared a family name faced the ruins of everything that name had represented. Meghan held herself steady, refusing to beg, but challenging the refusal before it could harden into permanent palace law. William had arrived with only one senior aide outside the door, signaling that the meeting was personal enough for honesty, but controlled enough to leave no room for confusion. Meghan asked why there was no way back, her voice tightening as she spoke of family recognition and basic respect after years of distance. William listened, but he did not soften his expression. He told her that trust could not be restored by request when boundaries had been crossed too many times. The monarchy survives on public confidence, not just private emotion. And he made it clear that every return carried a structural meaning. If Meghan was allowed back through pressure, every future boundary could be tested the same way. He chose his words like a man who knew one careless phrase could become a new wound. The room changed when the Wales children were indirectly pulled into the argument. Meghan pushed one final point about the importance of family moments, and William's face shifted into a mask of cold protection. He did not need to raise his voice to end the conversation. He set the pen down slowly and told Meghan the appeal was denied, not postponed. That small movement carried more force than a shout. Denied meant the door was locked. Postponed would have meant hope. The prince made it clear that future contact would move only through formal channels controlled by staff, not personal pleas. Meghan had wanted a human answer, but received a royal boundary instead. When she left that room, the question was no longer whether William had power, but how much of it he now controlled. Power inside the palace rarely announces itself with thunder. It moves through signatures, locked folders, and the silence of people who know better than to object. William's denial was not an isolated act of sibling rivalry. It was proof that the future king was no longer waiting at the edge of authority. He was using it to sculpt the monarchy in his own image, one built on discipline over drama. William's office took control of the appeal file the moment the meeting ended. A move that told the palace exactly where the center of gravity now rested. An appeal file is the written record of a request and the private notes used by senior officials to decide the future. This one touched every aspect of royal operations, the daily systems that decide who attends events and who receives briefings. Meghan's request had touched the very heart of the protocol that keeps the monarchy looking stable, so William did not leave the decision floating between different offices. He anchored it to his own desk. Charles was informed of the outcome, but the decision stayed with William. The king read the final wording and lowered his eyes, realizing that his son's division had crossed a formal line. He had spent years hoping silence might soften the anger, but the paper in front of him said otherwise. William had shown that the monarchy's future would no longer bend around old emotional wounds. Every royal family conflict becomes bigger when it starts changing the official rules of the house, and this refusal was now a matter of palace law. Catherine watched William after the meeting and saw no victory in his eyes. She saw the exhaustion that remains when a person wins the argument but loses another piece of their peace. She knew why he had done it. Meghan's appeal was about how close pressure could come to the inner circle of the Wales family. Protecting the children meant allowing William to carry the public blame for being cold, and the prince accepted that role with a grim sense of duty. The silence between them was heavy with the knowledge of what they had protected at the cost of their own comfort. The palace legal team confirmed the next step with clinical precision. Their guidance was simple. Any future communication from Meghan had to move through restricted channels only. Restricted channels meant controlled routes where messages are screened by aides before ever reaching a senior royal. Then came the private note that finalized the era. The appeal was marked closed, meaning it could not be reopened without William's personal approval. The prince had created a locked system around the answer, and when that restriction reached Harry, the emotional fallout began faster than anyone expected. Harry did not need a public statement to know what had happened. He saw the verdict on Meghan's face. The silence told him first, then came the words denied, final, no way back. For a moment he was not a prince or a global headline. He was a husband watching the last bridge to his old life burn to the ground. Meghan told him that William had denied the final appeal, and the words landed between them like a physical weight. Harry understood at once that if Meghan was locked out, his own separation from the family became harder, colder, and more permanent. Her standing was tied to his life outside the palace, and William's refusal had struck both of them with the same force. Meghan felt the humiliation before she felt the anger, knowing that the denial had come through William personally rather than a faceless office. She had expected distance and delay, but she had not expected the prince to close the door with such direct, uncompromising force. Harry saw the pain in her eyes, and a flash of anger rose in him only to disappear into a quiet realization. He knew his brother well enough to know the difference between a threat and a final decision. William had not acted in the heat of the moment. The future king had measured the cost, accepted the pain, and still said no. Harry reached for the one route he thought might still be open, contacting a palace source who had once answered his calls. This time the call did not go through. The silence was not an accident. It was the start of the restricted contact protocol. Messages were being screened, controlled, and blocked before they could reach the inner sanctum. Meghan watched Harry try again, and the second silence hurt even more than the first. Charles made the situation worse by doing nothing. Harry waited for a sign from the king, one private message, one fatherly intervention, one small crack in the wall of the institution. Nothing came. The monarch's silence wounded him more deeply than William's refusal. Because a brother can be hard, but a father is supposed to leave a light on in the window. Harry finally understood that Charles was not stepping in to reverse the decision. The room seemed to shrink around them as the reality of their exile became an official royal policy. Before the world could react, Harry and William had one last exchange with no palace language left to hide behind. Some arguments explode and others end in a long, hollow pause. Harry wanted fury, but William offered only finality. No aid stood between them, and no formal notes softened the blow as they spoke as men who remembered the same childhood and carried the same grief, yet now stood on opposite sides of a locked door. Harry reached William directly because he no longer trusted the palace channels to carry the truth of his heart. He asked whether the denial could be reconsidered for the sake of family, rather than the institution arguing that the monarchy had already taken enough from their bond. William listened, but he did not offer the comfort Harry was searching for. He said the appeal would not be reopened because family could not be used as a path around consequences. Harry's voice broke when he asked if there was truly nothing left between them, and for the first time his anger sounded like pure, unadulterated grief. William paused, showing he wasn't enjoying the pain, but he didn't move. The future king was not punishing his brother for sport. He was carrying the bitter duty of saying what no one else wanted to say. Love did not erase responsibility, and blood did not erase the damage of the last 5 years. A brother could still care and still refuse. William finally revealed that the denial was about protecting Catherine and the children from renewed pressure, and those words changed the atmosphere. Catherine's peace shaped the stability of the next generation, and William would not gamble with the emotional safety of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Harry understood the meaning before he was ready to accept it. Meghan's appeal was not being treated as a simple request. It was being treated as a risk to the people William was sworn to protect. In that quiet moment, Harry realized the denial was not a cold revenge, but a boundary built around the future of the crown. William had chosen the next generation over the guilt of the past, and the choice left both brothers wounded. The prince had not opened the door, and Harry had not forced it. They now carried different futures. By the time the public learned of the denial, the private heartbreak had hardened into a national moment. The story broke before breakfast, and Britain woke to a headline that felt less like gossip and more like a judicial judgment. Outside Buckingham Palace, people read the same words again and again. Final appeal denied. Some gasped, some nodded, and some looked at the stone gates as if they had spoken themselves. The monarchy had made its choice, and everyone knew it. Meghan's face appeared on the front pages beside William's firm expression, and the headline "No Way Back" swallowed the nation whole. That front page mattered because royal stories become historic the moment the public decides what the palace's silence means. The unsmiling image of Meghan and the unmoved gaze of William drew a line the country could see clearly. A morning broadcaster called it the clearest sign yet that the era of William had already begun, turning private heartbreak into public meaning. Meghan's supporters called the decision cold and argued that the palace had chosen punishment over mercy, while loyalists saw it as the first strong boundary after years of confusion. The argument was no longer about Meghan alone. It was about whether the monarchy should forgive visibly or protect itself quietly. Near the railings of the palace, the debate felt personal to the people gathered there. Some whispered that Harry would never accept it, while others argued that Charles should have intervened. But the king's absence from the wording only deepened the feeling that William had become the decisive force in the family. A brief palace confirmation followed, stating that future requests would be handled through formal channels, only a brutal conclusion to an emotional plea. Meghan would not reach the center of the royal circle by calling from the outside. William's name carried the weight of the morning as he became the symbol of a harder, more disciplined royal future. Meghan had become the face of the closed door, while Harry stood at the heart of the pain, realizing that every public sentence pushed him further from the family he once knew. But beyond the headlines, the true verdict was about what the monarchy had become in the wake of the split. It was no longer a family business, it was a fortress. When the noise finally faded, only one question remained inside the palace. What had this refusal truly cost them? Meghan's appeal did not fail because one document was rejected. It failed because the people involved had changed beyond recognition. The monarchy had survived years of rupture by leaving doors half open, hoping time might do what apologies could not. But this time, the door closed fully, and the sound echoed through the halls of history. Meghan understood that palace life was not just about titles. It was about belonging to an official rhythm she could no longer hear. She would not return through private appeal or emotional pressure. The refusal had become the rule of the land. William carried the cost of that rule without celebration, marking a defining moment in his leadership. He had shown that the future monarchy would choose stability over sentiment when the two could no longer coexist. Every unclear boundary had become a fresh wound, and every soft exception a new argument. William had sharpened his authority, but he had also deepened the silence between brothers. Harry now faced the hardest consequence of his own choices. The old royal world was no longer waiting for him to come back, and Charles's silence became its own final statement. The king's quiet proved that even a father's sadness could not overrule the direction of the crown. Charles may have felt the loss as a parent, but the monarch could not undo what William had decided for the next generation. Catherine's presence behind the prince revealed what the decision was truly protecting: the emotional safety of the heirs. William would not gamble with the future of George, Charlotte, and Louis, no matter the personal cost.